Greetings, welcome to Only the Parts You Need, a GURPS podcast. In this episode I would like to talk about everything about dual-wielding in GURPS. Dual-wielding is cool, even though it's often impractical. However, both in D&D and GURPS it can be quite difficult to wrap your head around rules-wise. I've decided to compile everything in this episode and also in the transcript. The link is in the description. So I will be able to understand it better and have it as a reference material. While the typical character only has 2 hands, I will also try to discuss things in the context of characters with more hands. Regardless of how many hands you have, only one of them is your primary hand. Being left-handed is a 0-point feature. Any significant actions performed with your off hand are at -4. Excluding things that are normally done with your offhand, like using a shield. First, let's talk about some of the advantages that are related to dual wielding. Ambidexterity removes the aforementioned -4 penalty for using the offhand, but does not allow you to take any extra actions in combat. It also has a note that if something happens to one of your hands, assume that it's the left one. Why? If you get hit in the right hand, will your left hand get crippled? This note probably is for games that do not use hit locations, because otherwise it doesn't make much sense. Arm dexterity improves your dexterity with 1 or 2 of your arms. However, since combat skills are reliant on bodily dexterity, this will not improve your combat skills. Arm strength, on the other hand, will affect your damage. Extra arms is where things start to get much more complicated. Remember that regardless of how many arms you have, only one of them is your primary arm. Ambidexterity makes all arms primary, even if you have 8 of them. If you have many arms, you can perform multiple non-combat tasks at the same time, but as long as they do not require much attention. However, in combat, you can still only attack once, unless you have extra attack. Having 4 arms, for example, could allow you to dual-wield 2 two-handed weapons. Extra attack is again something complicated, as there are some tricky interactions between this advantage and certain attack options. By default it allows an additional attack per turn, but they must be made with different weapons. 2 swords in 2 hands is fine. A sword and a punch is fine. 2 punches with 2 hands is fine, but slashing twice with the same sword is not. So this is a good advantage for dual wielders, and a single level of it is even within the realistic limits. However, it does not eliminate the -4 to dexterity for using the offhand. If you are making an all-out attack, then all your attacks take the same bonus. You cannot make a determined attack with your right hand and a strong attack with the left hand. If you make an all-out attack double, you only get 1 additional attack, not 1 attack per attack. Thus, all-out attack double with extra attack 1 will result in 3 attacks, not 4, and all-out attack double with extra attack 2 will result in 4 attacks, not 6. It is not mentioned anywhere, but I assume that the same applies to committed attacks and defensive attacks. What about telegraphic attacks? Can you telegraph an attack with 1 hand but not with the other? You probably cannot, because it modifies a maneuver, not an attack, so all attacks must be telegraphic. But that's just my assumption. Regardless of how many attacks per turn you can make, only one of them can be a rapid strike. Only that attack takes the rapid strike penalties and the rest do not. I guess if you have altered time rate, you can make more rapid strikes, as you have more maneuvers, not attacks. Multi-strike enhancement allows you to use the same weapon for extra attacks. Single skill limitation limits your extra attack to a single skill. However, this does not circumvent the requirements to actually have enough limbs or weapons. Thus, if you have 2 broadswords and extra attack 2 single skill broadsword, then you will only be able to make 2 attacks, not 3, unless you combine it with multi-strike, of course. Heroic Archer halves the -4 penalty to shoot 2 arrows at once using dual weapon attack bow. Technically this is not dual wielding, but it uses the same mechanics, so I will include it here. There are also several perks that can help you with dual wielding. Akimbo is a cinematic perk that doesn't help you fight with two weapons, but lets you open doors, reload and do other similar things without putting anything down. Dual Ready lets you draw two weapons with a single ready maneuver. Offhand weapon training eliminates the -4 offhand penalty for one skill. This perk completely replaces the offhand weapon training technique, because that one is way too point inefficient. Also, once you have accumulated 5 of these perks, you can safely replace them with the ambidexterity advantage. GURPS Power-Ups 2 perks on page 16 expands this perk with non-combat options, turning it into offhand training. This is basically a soft errata for the offhand weapon training technique. One-Armed Bandit lets you operate a lever or pump action long arm one-handed. Combine it with Akimbo and you'll be able to dual-wield the pump action shotguns. Quick Swap makes moving one weapon from one hand to another a free action instead of a ready maneuver. This is useful in situations where you get partially disarmed. Unusual Training Dual Weapon Attack, both attacks must target the same foe, appears on many styles in GURPS martial arts. This one allows improving the technique even in realistic games, where the dual weapon attack technique is usually forbidden. Now there is only 3 skills that I have to talk about. Cloak can be used as a shield. This is one of those actions that do not take the -4 offhand penalty. But is the offensive use of the cloak also penalized? Personally, I do not think so, but I haven't found anything concrete. Main Gash allows you to wield any weapon that is normally wielded with knife or jitte sai skill in the offhand. When wielded this way, you ignore the -4 penalty when defending, and the -1 penalty to parry that most knives have. Offhand attacks are still penalized, but GURPS Martial Arts says on page 58 that you can use Main Gash in your primary hand. You do get improved defense, but can still attack with no penalty. However, remember that Main Gash is an average skill, while Knife is an easy one. Shield does not take offhand penalties both for blocking and attacking with the shield. You can even dual wield shields, but in that case the defense bonus does not stack. You still get more block attempts per turn and are protected against attacks from all sides. I wonder if it is possible to dual wield cloaks. That would look silly. There are several techniques that are related to dual wielding. The first one is dual weapon attack. It should not be confused with the dual weapon attack option. This technique lets you buy off the -4 penalty for performing these dual weapon attacks, but not the additional -4 offhand penalty. This is a cinematic technique unless the skill in question is Guns Pistol. Why not Beam Weapons Pistol too, and why not Crossbow? I don't know, but I would probably allow these as well. Double-ended attack is a technique from GURPS Fantasy Tech 2 Weapons of Fantasy. This is a variant of the dual weapon attack technique for double-ended weapons. The only question is, why isn't a staff a double-ended weapon? Dual weapon defense lets you buy off a -1 to defend against dual weapon attacks. If you are wielding a long weapon, you can even do that with a single parry roll, not 2. Ear Clap works much better if you perform it with both hands at once. Hands-free riding is essential if you are dual wielding on horseback. Hook is much more useful when you have another weapon ready to strike. Offhand weapon training lets you buy off the -4 offhand penalty, but it has been replaced by the offhand weapon training perk that I described before. So, why dual wield at all? Yes, it does look cool, but it seems that you have to invest many points to be able to attack with both weapons at once, unless using all-out attack double, and to wield the weapons properly in both hands. Seems a bit lackluster, right? But let's explore this further. Dual weapon attacks is an optional rule that might be cinematic but is balanced enough for realistic campaigns. This one lets you attack with two weapons with an attack maneuver instead of all-out attack double, meaning that you will not be defenseless. Nothing is said about this being compatible with committed attack, defensive attack, or telegraphic attack, but it probably is. However, it seems that this cannot be used with move and attack. Each attack gets a -4 to skill, and your offhand attack is further penalized by -4, unless you have ambidexterity or the necessary perk to eliminate that. The first -4 penalty can be both off with the eponymous technique that I mentioned before. This is not a single attack roll, but two of them. For melee attacks, you must either hit the same target or two adjacent targets. If you direct both attacks at the same target, he defends at -1. If you are making a ranged dual weapon attack, then this -1 penalty only applies to parries. This penalty to defend can be both off with the dual weapon defense technique that I mentioned before. If you have multiple attacks, only one of them can be a dual weapon attack, the rest must be single weapon attacks. You can even combine it with all-out attack double. As per page 83 of GURPS Martial Arts, you can use dual weapon attack with a bow to shoot two arrows at once, possibly at different targets. This penalty is halved with Heroic Archer. You can also use dual weapon attacks to feint or beat with one weapon and attack with another. That's pretty good if you can eliminate the offhand penalty. Combinations from GURPS Martial Arts take reduced penalties when a combination involves two different weapons. All these options make dual wielding much better. However, even without them, there are some advantages. For example, since you have a weapon in each hand, you have a wider arc of possible attacks in tactical combat. You can attack to your front, right or left without changing facing, and that can be important. The same applies to parries. Typically, you get only one parry per weapon per turn, so that's usually one parry. Now you can parry twice per turn and can defend from all sides. If you are using cumulative -5 parry penalties from GURPS Martial Arts, you effectively get an additional unpenalized parry. The same applies to blocks when dual-wielding shields. Mangosh not only gives you an unpenalized offhand parry but also a fencing parry, which turns you into a nuisance that is difficult to hit. Dual-wielding weapons with different reach values might come in handy as well. For example, if you have an axe with reach 1 in your right hand, you will be heavily penalized in close combat, so having a reach C weapon in your offhand would be useful. An additional very useful defense option is cross parry from page 121 of GURPS Martial Arts. The bonus is nothing to laugh at, and it also allows you to parry flails and heavy weapons more effectively. Do not use it when fighting multiple opponents though. Unarmed attacks by default do not take the offhand penalty, but the strong and weak hands optional rule in the harsh realism for unarmed fighters box on page 124 of GURPS Martial Arts makes it apply. Certain double-ended weapons allow using dual weapon attack against two adjacent foes. Such weapons include Xiang Hunji Yue Dao 3-part staff and the double-ended weapons from GURPS Fantasy Tech 2 Weapons of Fantasy. Douglas Cole also wrote two interesting blog posts about dual weapon attacks. You can see the links for them in the transcript. And that's it. I think I understand dual wielding better now, and I hope you do too. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.